This is Our Modern Heritage, the Home and Family Culture podcast, and I'm your host, Jodi Chaffee, and I am so excited to have on the show with me today, Jaime Clemmer. Jaime has a bachelor's in science in psychology with a minor in women's studies. She has 4 children, and I'm going to stumble over this, Jaime, because I'm just I want to say all the things, but I know we're going to talk about them. Okay. But Jaime is researching and training on best practices for domestic and sexual violence cases. But her story is so much more than this. Okay. Jaime started this website called Heartbroken But Not Broken. And she is also in the process of writing a manuscript about her experience of losing her son to a brain aneurysm. So welcome, Jaime.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to talk to you because grief is something that is it's very personal to me, and it's very personal to a lot of people. And this is something that I know that we can have a really great conversation about. But you started this website called Heartbroken But Not Broken. Can you tell us more about that?
I can, but in order to tell you about the website, I have to tell you about my family really quickly. I have 4 children. I have a 21-year-old who's in college. I have a 17-year-old. I have what we call a forever 10-year-old, my son Sawyer, who died when he was 10, and we have a 7-year-old. And it was very sudden. Sawyer died very unexpectedly. And one day I took him into school, and oh, by the way, I totally cry, and that's okay. And I'm okay with my tears, so everybody else can be okay with my tears too.
Yes.
But we took him into school, and that was the last time that we saw him conscious. Unfortunately, he had a seizure at the school and was taken to the hospital, had 3 surgeries, and did not make it. He was an organ donor, and so he donated 7 gifts to other families. And so we started talking about that, and we started talking about our grief, and our grief became really public very quickly because of my husband's job. And so suddenly we were splayed out for all to see with our grief. And so we had been asked to speak at a UNOS event to talk about organ donation. And I had been using the hashtag Heartbroken But Not Broken on a lot of posts that I had made on Facebook. And as I gave this talk at the UNOS event, I was flooded with people afterwards who came up to me and said, that encapsulates everything I feel. And, the audience was people who've lost someone who were also organ donors. And I thought, there's just no reason for us to be grieving alone. And that's sort of been my mission. My husband and I call ourselves grief ambassadors. It's our little
nice.
And that's sort of the movement we're trying to create here.
Wow. That's I can't even express the feelings and so much going on with, when I say that I'm familiar with grief and I simply, I understand, I sympathize. I've never lost anyone personally that close to me. And so I don't want to minimize your, when you say, the things that you experience. Sure. I feel like I can imagine the trauma, and the grief that I experience is personal and more along the lines of mental health issues. But, what did you say? What did you talk about in that conference that so many people gravitated towards that? What was your message?
Yeah. So our message was that this sucks.
Right.
And life is hard, and this is wrong. This is just wrong. No one should bury their child, Yeah. And it's interesting as so my husband was superintendent of schools at the time. And so when Sawyer was rushed off to the hospital, it made the front page news. Everybody was there. His classmates watched the helicopter fly away. I consider myself a pretty private person, but after that, it's there was no way to be private about that. We had 500 people at his service,
Wow.
And so knowing that it was going to be out there for everybody, I started talking about the fact that we were heartbroken, but we were not broken, and that was okay.
Yeah.
And, our message really resonated with people because it was this idea that even though this terrible thing has happened to us, we are sad, we're going to have to move on because we have our own lives to live and we have other children. I mean, we have 3 surviving children that I had to sort of create a family culture for
Right.
that was not totally defined by sorrow, grief, and loss. So I had to find a way to sculpt that into something that they could look back on and say, you know what, this terrible thing happened and I hate it. But that wasn't the only part of my childhood. And so that's what we talked about. And it seemed to hit a nerve with people.
Wow. So what you say heartbroken but not broken, but what was it that allowed you to not break?
So good question. I don't know. I don't know.
One step at a time, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember sitting in the hospital and it was our final goodbye. They had taken him down for his final surgery where he would donate all of his 7 organs. And we were just screaming in that empty room and sobbing and traumatized. And we knew our family was sitting back at home freaking out because we hadn't seen them in 5 days,
Yeah.
And we were sitting there and just sobbing. And my husband and I were just holding each other. And we said, I said, this cannot break us. It could break us, but we can't let this break us. And then he said the famous line, we are heartbroken, but we are not broken. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that there aren't broken days or broken seasons or broken months, but it means that we can fill in the breaks and fill in the cracks with those other things because we can't just crumble. We can't.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the other things? Like, what have you been able to, establish? Like you said, you have 3 other children who are survivors, and they still need a childhood or, still need their parents. Totally. And how tempting it is to just want to fall back into that grief. But what were some of the other things that have allowed you to?
Yeah. So one of the things that is big for our family is keeping Sawyer's memory alive. It's very important to us that we communicate to the world that we have 4 children and one of them we will see later, but we have 4 children. And so that communicating that message to our children was extremely important, making sure that they understood that they still have a brother. And so making sure that when Sterling would draw pictures of her family, that she was drawing everybody in the family. And however she wanted to draw them was fine, but that Sawyer was still her brother. I mean, she was 3 when Sawyer died. And in those first couple of days, we're all just talking about it, but I've got this 3-year-old who doesn't understand. And she kept saying, when does Sawyer come back from heaven? Like heaven is Florida or something,
Right.
like
vacation.
Like how do you get, somebody to wrap their head around that? And so keeping him part of the narrative has been critically important, and allowing them to discuss and talk about their feelings and or not talk about their feelings. Right. I look at my 3-year-old and I'll never forget, we had gone to just go to Food Lion to get, food for the meal for that day. And we were shucking corn because in the South, you shuck the corn at the grocery store. Apparently you don't do that other places. I don't know if they do that in Michigan.
We do in the Midwest. Yeah. Yeah,
okay,
we did.
Okay. So in the South, you shuck your corn at the trash can. So we're like shucking corn. And my 3-year-old tells the woman who's shucking corn, we're here because my brother died and he was 10. And she was like, have a good day, bye. Like grabbed her corn and left, and we were, so we had to talk to Sterling about, you can tell whoever you want. You can tell her in whatever way you want. And they may not respond or she may not understand, but, feel free to talk about it however you want. Yeah. That was important to us. But then we have a 17-year-old who at the time was 14, who was his best friend, who clamped up.
Right.
And we talked about all these different things. We could try this, we could do that. We talked to all the counselors, all the professionals. What do we do? What do we do? And we decided to let him drive the train. And, now we're 3 years later, and to be able to see him take control of his life in a positive way is something I didn't know if I could ever see again. but letting him steer that and recognizing that every child is different. And we
Yeah.
have to let those children function the way they want.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I love that. I love that. Like that to me is, when I talk about family culture, I believe that trust is like the fuel that carries us forward in our family culture journey, and being able to allow your kids to grieve in their own way. So much trust is nurtured in that, especially when something traumatic like that happens, that almost feels like a breach of trust, like eternal trust, right?
Oh,
Like,
yes.
and to be able to work on your allow them, not work on, but just allow them the
Yes.
space to reestablish some kind of trust that in order to go forward is
Yeah.
so crucial. So
Yeah.
crucial.
One thing that's come out that we've had several people talk to us privately or, send us messages about is that, people that we've known forever and people that we haven't known very much have said things like, when I was younger, I also had a sibling who died and my family never talked about it. And, or, I never got to process those emotions because we just didn't ever bring it up. And these are people that I've known for a very long time, that I've had intimate relationships, intimate conversations with, and they're like disclosing to me only now. And I
Right.
think there was a time, there was a different attitude, I think, 10 years ago, 20 years ago than now. But even still, I think just being able to acknowledge and allow people to live in their grief, even when it makes other people uncomfortable, is really important. So, for my family, we talk about our grief and we're open with our grief. And I can't tell you how many people have said, watching you heal has helped me heal from X or Y or Z. And like you
Yeah.
mentioned, it's not that everybody's lost a child, but, and I know other people who've lost children disagree with me on this point, but I do believe at some basic level, grief is grief. I do believe that. And so, your grief is about one thing, my grief is about something. So we can't totally vibe exactly the same, but we absolutely can connect and relate. And that empathy, I think, is so important.
I think that's why sometimes like when I first met you and it was like, hey, Jaime is going to be in your community and your
Yes.
congregation. And I
Yes.
was just like, I kind
What
of
do we
like, what
do?
do I do? What do I talk
Yeah.
about? I didn't want to make you feel like I know how you feel when I don't. I have
Yeah.
no idea how that feels. But at the same time, I've experienced a lot of trauma and mental health issues and all the stuff that it's like, okay, but still doesn't relate, doesn't commute. And so it's just like, okay, so okay, I just felt like, okay, I'm just gonna be loving and kind, like that's
Yes.
the best that I could do.
Yes.
So that's what I want to talk about next, I think, is these relationships with other people,
Yeah.
and like how have people responded to your grief, and then maybe even talk about what you recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting as you're talking, there's a famous author and writer, Iyanla Van Zant, and she talks about how, sharing your story helps you heal, but it also helps other people heal.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really critical for me, especially as someone who labels himself, a private person. To have this out there for the world is vulnerability. We talked about
Yep.
vulnerability. It makes me
Yep.
extremely vulnerable, which sometimes is good and sometimes can be painful. But
Yeah.
you talk about what has it done or what have people done. My favorite thing that someone can say or has said is, I maybe don't understand, but I'm here for you. Or,
Wow.
I'm so sorry this happened to you. I don't have the right words, but I want you to know I know you're in pain. Somebody came up to me at church one time and said, I have no sense of what you're going through, but I want you to know I see your pain and I acknowledge it. And it was so
Wow.
powerful for me. That was really powerful for me. Then there are some people who just totally don't get it. They totally don't get it. I'll never forget. It was the summer after. So, I mean, Sawyer died in late October, right before Halloween, 2016. So it was that following summer. And so we had gone to the community playground. I had taken Sterling. I was really just at that point barely getting out in public, really at all.
Yeah.
And they were doing like a play group with her preschool. So I said, okay, we'll go. So we go. And I was taking her into the restroom and I passed one of the preschool teachers. And she said, how's your summer been? And I was like, well, actually, it's been pretty rough, and it's our first summer without Sawyer, and the kids are all really struggling because their playmate is gone. In the school year, you're busy, but in the summer, you notice it, those late empty rooms, those play dates that are just you sitting, we were really feeling it. And so I was trying to express that in like 2 sentences. And I said, yeah, so my kids are really just struggling. And she said, oh, really? Still? And I was seriously thrown off my game. And I was just like,
no.
Still. Yes, still. Okay, Sterling, get your things. We have to go. I'll take you to McDonald's or something, and it was just like ripped my gut out. And I thought, are people really wanting me to be over this? I'm not sure I'll ever be over it, but oh my gosh, like, are you really saying this? And then I remember one time at church, I was at a church function. It wasn't our regular worship meeting. It was like an extra meeting that you could do, like a Bible study class.
Okay.
And, someone had said, well, aren't you glad they're in a better place? Aren't you glad they're in a better place? And I said, well, which of your kids do you want in this better place? Right here, right now, pick one. And I think it kind of threw her. And I said, there is no better place than in my arms and in my lap. I'm sorry. And she just, I think, was thrown off. And then I just went into so I when you get your nerves are building all up and you're like trying to come up with words. So I spit it out, and then I walked out the door, and I just cried in the grass, and I just cried and cried. And I thought, do people really believe this rhetoric, that
it's helpful?
That it's helpful? I think some people really do. And to me, if I could say anything, it would be, don't believe the hype. There's not a way to get over it. The quips of time heals all wounds and things like that, they don't do anything except deny the validity of someone who's grieving.
Right. And well, and I think that's another reason why I didn't know what to, people don't know what to say, because it's like, this is so cliche to say, always in a better place. And it's like, that doesn't help.
Right.
Time will heal wounds. No, I don't know, because I'm not there yet in time. That doesn't help me now. Or things like that.
Sorry, I have a friend who's a psychologist, and she's one of my closest friends. So of course we've talked through a lot of this kind of stuff. And she said, well, Jaime, at some point you're like critical of people who say quippy things, but you're also critical of people who don't acknowledge. So can anybody do anything right? And, I'm like, oh yeah.
Where's the balance?
Let me think about that. And I'm like, I do think it's balanced. Like if you go out to a restaurant and someone's got spinach in their teeth, and if you wait too long, then you're like, oh, I've waited too long. You have to acknowledge it at some point, because then 2 days later, they're like, I still have spinach in my teeth and I have these or whatever. It's like, you have to acknowledge it in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's where authenticity comes into play. Acknowledge it in a way that's authentic for you, Jodi. And for you, Jodi, it was just to be a kind person. I remember someone else, it was one of my first public outings, and I started like, not just little crying, but like weeping. But you're in public, so you're like, no, I'm not doing this, And she like discreetly made her way through the crowd, handed me a tissue, and then moved on. That was an extremely authentic way to acknowledge my grief,
Yeah.
And I think for my family, I've noticed that people are quick to acknowledge my grief. I think sometimes they want to brush the children's grief under the rug, because it's like, oh, the kids look like they're doing great. Well, yes, because they're, 5, and so they want to play dolls when they're in the sand pit. But you don't see the nightmares. You don't see that I'm sleeping with her every night, that I'm on the floor. You don't see the hospital drawings she does as like a 4-year-old of her brother dying in a bed. I mean, it would rip your guts out. But because out in public, everybody's just playing their role, I think people don't know what to say to kids. And so I think another thing is just acknowledging the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, it's almost like people try to, we all want to like make sense of everything.
Yes.
That's the thing. Like, we all want to make sense of it, and to be like, oh, let's assign something to this child that makes sense. They're doing okay, they're
Right.
recovering or whatever, like it makes sense to me. Or to say, oh, they're in a better place, or time will heal you, like that's something that it's just like, this makes sense to me, to be
Right.
able to like package it up into this little thing that I can like assign somewhere that makes sense to me. Okay. And so, because it's like a lot of people, grief just doesn't make sense and they don't
Right.
understand it, and so they don't know how to like categorize it into our like psyche or whatever. And so it's just like, we try to, everybody does this, we try to assign these labels to things, but grief is for some reason one of those things that doesn't compute.
Right. No, totally. Totally. And you get this idea, and I think fear plays into a huge piece of
Oh
it
yeah.
because, as a bystander, chaos in someone else's life could equally mean chaos in my life. Because if that's something that they can't control, that means it can happen to me. And I had friends who grew up with me, whose kids grew up with me, who I thought we were close. And suddenly after the funeral, it was like, we'll come visit. But there were no visits.
Right.
And it was like, I think part of it was too much. Like watching my kids and me and my husband deal with our grief and know that it was just random. It was totally random. You know,
Mhm.
Sawyer had an AVM on the brain. It ruptured. It's crazy. Like the numbers are crazy about how rare it is. Fine, whatever. It was obviously undiagnosed. But so that kind of chaos in my life translates to, well, if it can happen to her, can it happen to me? And
Right.
it's like this subconscious notion that almost like grief is communicable, you
Right.
know?
Well, and I just like it's just something that we're going, I just don't know how to cope with it myself. I think that some people just like,
Totally.
I don't know how to cope with this. So I'm just going to avoid it, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's so that is I'm so sorry, Jaime.
No, don't even apologize. Well, you can't apologize. Thank you for,
I'm
thank you
so
for your
sorry.
apology.
That is my authentic reaction to
Yes,
what
yes.
you're going through, is just to say I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But the point I want to get across is like, there's no finger pointing. There's no blame.
Yeah.
All there is for, in my mind, a huge desire to open the conversation. Because if
Yeah.
we take away the fear and the shame that are regularly associated with sorrow and grief, then we can have actual conversations about it. And then we can talk about it. I remember one of my teenagers, like a mom of one of my teenagers' friends. Does that even make sense? Like, the
I
teen
got it.
moms, yeah, you got me, you're with me. She came up to me at one point and she was like, I want my teenager to be able to talk to your teenager. What are some things I can say? And at that point, my teenager didn't want to talk. So I said, please have your teenager be a gatekeeper for my teenager. And if it comes up, and it's going to, let your teenager change the subject. He
Wow.
doesn't want to talk about it, or even say, hey guys, I don't think he wants to talk about this, but the fact that that mother approached me was so powerful.
Wow. That is powerful. Like, what a simple gesture, but so powerful.
So powerful. And again, it goes back to talking. Are we willing to talk about it, or are
Yeah.
we too uncomfortable or embarrassed or protective? I don't have the luxury of being uncomfortable or protective, or, I don't
Yeah.
get that luxury. So for people who are willing to sort of step into our family circle and recognize that we can't be those things is really a blessing to us. Those people who
Well,
are willing to step into the circle and say, I
yeah.
see your family as it is, and we accept it, and we're ready to walk with you.
I love that. And what it made me think of is that like we outside of this observing on the outside need to check our own triggers. Like what
Right.
is it? What is it about somebody else's grief that we're going, triggering and the stigma or whatever, like why?
Yeah,
Why? Examine our own history of like being, I don't know, being in an uncomfortable situation or something like that, and it's like, okay, now move on from it. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like check
yeah,
our own
totally.
triggers, examine them, and then be present with them so that then we can acknowledge our own problems, our own triggers, so that we can be present for you.
Totally, totally. Because the other piece of that is when other people were willing to open themselves up to me, it helped me open up. I had a
Yeah.
couple of people who linked me with different strangers that had also lost children. And those relationships with strangers were immensely impactful on how I processed my grief, how I'm processing my grief, how I helped my family process their grief. And had those people never said, hey, I want to introduce you to so and so, her son also died. If people had kept that and held that in, I just think, oh, I would be in such a darker place.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
how appreciative I am of people who even opened up about, I had someone who opened up to me, who's never had children. And she opened up to me about the grief and loss she feels in not having children. And we were
Wow.
able to communicate and relate. And every little story that I hear helps me heal. So if I can help someone heal by letting them hear our story, that's immensely powerful because it's karma. It comes back to you.
Yeah. I love this. So, okay, so now I want to kind of shift a little bit the conversation because, okay, the other day you posted this amazing quote
I
on
love it.
your profile. I'm going to pull it up because I want to read it because it was just like, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And there's another quote that I have too that maybe if it comes up I want to read it. But you shared this quote and it says it's from Francis Weller. It says the work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can you hold? That's how much gratitude I can give. If I carry only grief, I'll bend towards cynicism and despair. If I have only gratitude, I'll become, I can't pronounce that word, saccharine,
Saccharin, yeah.
Saccharin, okay.
Yeah.
And won't develop much compassion for other people's suffering. Grief keeps the heart fluid and soft, which helps make compassion possible. Like, I love that
Right?
so much. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful because it's like, if you've ever met somebody who's like incessantly optimistic and you're just like, really? And it's like almost equally difficult to be around those
Yeah.
kinds of people
Like,
in a
is
way.
it genuine? Yes, yes.
Yeah, and genuine. That's exactly, and it's like, yes, I love those kinds of people. And it's like, gosh, sometimes I think I wish I could be more like that in some ways. But then in other ways, I'm like, you know, I I think that it's healthy to have a more realistic, balanced perspective about the realities that we live in an immortal, fallen world with tragedy that exists in this world. And that doesn't mean that we have to like harden ourselves up. There's this one quote, I can't remember, there's this one lady talked about like our job is not to harden our kids up for the world so that they can, they can be tough and stuff like
Yeah.
that. No, it's our job is to bring our kids up in a world to be able to recognize the difference between good and evil and things like that.
Yeah.
And so um having that balance. So how do you keep that balance, Jaime?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Um, I met this wonderful author, Bethany Brady Spalding, and she introduced me to that quote, and it has just played like a loop in my head. And that line that will be stretched large by them. You know,
Wow.
I I have been stretched. I have been stretched. And sometimes people will say, "Well, oh, you're so strong. How are you so strong?" And I'm like, I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I wish I could be weak and just crumble, but I can't. And so I have to look for these ways to be grateful and be sorrowful and not let one overpower the other, or moderation in all things, right?
Yeah.
And I have to do little things. So in the beginning, all I could do was do something nice for my children, or write a note to somebody, or say thank you
Mm.
because of the nice things that people did. I was really meticulous about thank you notes in the aftermath. And everybody's like, no one expects a thank you note. And I said, I'm not thanking them for them. I'm thanking them for me. So it
Wow.
gives
Yeah.
me a task to do. So it reminds me, so I can train my brain that in the sorrow, there is a tiny speck of light. I'm writing the thank you notes for me. And
Yeah.
so just doing little things, little things. I remember one time your family even was moving and you were packing up things, and I was like, I'm going to take them a meal. And I took you a meal, and I had made two of them, one for me, one for you. My family ate it. It was disgusting. It was disgusting. I, to this day,
I don't remember this.
I'm like, do you guys remember this terrible meal that we brought you? Oh my gosh, it's like a family joke. Like, yeah, like that meal you gave the Chafees, you know? And it was so disgusting. And I thought, it's a good thing I took this meal because I needed to get myself up and out and help someone else, because it was not about the meal. It was nasty. Like, I'm
I
sure
don't
you
remember this, but okay.
I'm sure you did. But, you know, finding the little things that sort of can help you, like the little lifeline out of the dark
Yeah.
hole, that is for me how I try to balance that grief and gratitude, and not being saccharine, not being overly disingenuous in my joy.
Yeah.
Yes, we're joyful, but you know what? Sometimes even the joy you feel guilty about, you
Yeah.
know, like, oh, am I supposed to be excited about a new beginning? Can I be hopeful? Is that dishonoring his memory or his legacy? And wrestling with all those questions. But
Yeah.
until somebody is willing to articulate that and have conversations about that, I don't even know the answer, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like with Elizabeth Smart, you know, when she talked
Yeah,
about coming home and her mom was like, don't give your abductors another minute. Don't even dwell on it. You just let it go. And I can, like, for her situation, 100%, right? Like, just let it go. But at the same time, like, she uses that experience to empower herself to do
that's
so
right.
much good,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
And so it's just like, I don't know, it's like people might use your grief to say, well, let's honor that
Yes.
name, you know, honor Sawyer, honor those things that he did. And I feel like you're doing that, you know, by telling your story, by writing your book, by talking about organ donation and all those things. It's like you're honoring what he's done and his sacrifice and that he lived,
Yeah.
and that, you know, he still lives in you.
Yeah.
I feel, does that,
Yeah.
I don't want to say
Yeah.
anything that sounds off or weird
No,
or
no, no. Oh, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. No, I'm just kidding. You know, no, it's like, so his nickname, so Sawyer, his nickname was Soy, like they call him Soy or soy sauce, like whatever. And what's funny, because our daughter then was Sterling, so they called her stir fry, so it was like stir fry and soy sauce, but regard. But anyway, so Soy was his nickname. So when we had his service, you know, we had hundreds of preteens who were there, and we didn't want it to just be sad. And in
Yeah.
fact, we had put like, everybody wear your crazy, he was into like crazy cats. It was like the beginning of the crazy cat era, you know? So we're like, wear your bright colors and your crazy cat t-shirts. Those will honor him more than your sad, stuffy dresses and pants and stuff.
Right.
So we had created these bracelets, these colorful bracelets that took his SOY, the acronym SOY, and it stands for strong, outrageous, and you. So be strong, be outrageous, be you. And because he was so unique and he was so outrageous and he was crazy. I mean, that kid was crazy. He was crazy. And so, you know, we don't get to watch all the crazy things that he'll get to do. And so we will have to carry him in our heart and do crazy things and outrageous things and brave things for him and in his honor. And so I can't do that unless I talk about it, unless I put it out there, unless I am dialoguing about, you know, I can't talk about his life without talking about his death, and I can't talk about his death without honoring his life. And
Yeah.
so for me, they're inextricably linked. They just are. And so that's what Heartbroken But Not Broken has tried to do, is link those conversations.
Wow. Awesome. Jaime, I just thank you so much for this conversation and being able to be here on my show to talk about this stuff. I know that it's something that it's scary and vulnerable. And I would just want to acknowledge you that you are strong. And I love that you've been able to take this experience and touch the lives of so many people who are grieving or need to know that grief is something that we need to embrace and acknowledge as like part of our lives. And so maybe just in conclusion, what would be like your advice for families who are grieving and how they can be intentional about the way that they're shaping their family culture and raising their families?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is to look inward. You know, we really hunkered down and we were really protective of our family. Every phone call we took, every email we sent, everything that went in and everything went out, we were extremely protective of. And we still try to protect that, you know, nucleus, because there are so many judgments out there and there are
Yes.
so many harsh ideologies and comments, and we just try to protect ourselves. So I would say, however every family needs to protect themselves, that's what they need to do. And what it looks like for my family is entirely different than what it might look like for your family or somebody else's family. And so I think letting people accept that however they're doing it is okay if they're finding health and healing. And it doesn't matter how slow it is or what it looks like, but to just let your family be the way your family needs to be to survive. You know, in the immediate aftermath, we've all put on a lot of grief weight. And I couldn't cook. The first time I went to go serve plates and I realized I had to get out less plates, I just started sobbing in the kitchen, and cooking was a really hard thing for me. And so we ate out a lot. And so, you know, as I'm watching the pounds get on all of us, everybody else is too. So when people would make comments about, oh yeah, you know, this or that, or people are getting chubby or chunky, and it's like, well, yeah, they are, but it's what we need to do to stay alive, to stay sane. And, you know, so going back to just this idea that whatever a family who's grieving needs to do, people need to respect grievers in their grief and trust that they know what's best for their family. And at the same time, if you don't know what's best for your family, reach out in a way that is meaningful and find people who can lead and guide you down this crazy, clearly unmarked path.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jaime.
You're so
Thank you. That's
welcome.
awesome.
No,
And you said you have those bracelets. Can't they get those from your website? And also
they can, and all the money goes to the Sawyer Scholarship. So yes,
so awesome.
Heartbroken But Not Broken.com.
That's so awesome. And then I've seen people post pictures of like going places, and they'll post a picture of the bracelet from all around the world and stuff, and be like, "This is where now Sawyer's been here," type of thing.
It's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is when I get a little photo and someone's like, in fact, I've got mine on. I wear it every day. When someone says, "Oh, I wore it in India," or I took it to the Olympics. It's like a little bit of Sawyer got to do all these things, so I love it.
That's so cool. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jaime.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble on. I appreciate it.
I love this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.